to keep
I'm on now.
people entertained.
Yeah, just setting our starting lineup. Cool. Before you actually hit the link, let me send this out to people.
How do you want to do this, Murph? Obviously, oh,
I don't think so. Hang on, I've got my sound down on Twitter. Yeah, the audio is coming through.
Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Yo, what's happening, Rush Nation? We're back. It's Tuesday. I think it's Tuesday. My head is all over the place today, but what I do know is tomorrow is franchise tag deadline. Murph, how you doing, big man?
All good, sir. Yeah, it is Tuesday. I can confirm that.
Good. Thanks.
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. Actually, I think I may have caught a slight case of the oak processionary moth rash today whilst ploughing through trees on the rough mower. But hey, that's just part and parcel of the job. Otherwise, I am all good. I'm all good. I'm pretty excited for tomorrow's franchise deadline. It just means another solid step is in place towards the season. And I'm pretty excited for today's show because we're going to be getting into our quarterback tiers. If you don't own the fantasy football playbook, you don't know what these are yet. In fact, the ones we're going to be talking about today are updated. But if you haven't got the book, then this is the first you're going to hear about our tiers, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. First time, unless you listened last year, or whatever. But these are new 2020 revised. Obviously, when we did the book, Cam Newton hadn't signed. Some situations were perhaps a little bit more ambiguous, and some have become more clear. Well, they're not too much. I don't think there's a lot of change in the quarterback rankings from the book. There's probably one or two bits that have been updated, but I think of all the tiers, tight end and quarterback are reasonably static from the book, whereas running back and wide receiver have had some changes as the days have gone on.
Yeah, you're telling me I somehow had Dante Pettis up at number 9 because I had a typo in my spreadsheet and he had 5,008 percentage of his yardage, like 5,000% of his catches. So that gave him a fair tally on what he actually had. But that's been adjusted, Rush Nation. Don't worry about that. Murph, you got the franchise tag news there?
Yeah, so a couple of bits of news from when we previously spoke. The first is something that was announced by the NFL last week, and they asked the NFLPA to place 35% of players' pay into escrow for 2020. And basically, what was going to happen was if they put this money into escrow based on the percentage of income that had gone down, it could potentially hit the money that was put in escrow. Therefore, basically, it was asking players to take a pay cut. Now, this isn't official. Should that happen, then I think the chances of getting a season could be heavily diminished. You've got players like Donovan Smith of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers basically not happy with playing at all. He's like, I don't understand how we can play and then go home and put my family at risk with the coronavirus. And now to do that, you're actually going to correct.
Yeah, I heard that news today.
And then to take 35% of my salary and not pay me that when you should actually be paying us more money. And it's a fair point. It's an additional risk to playing this season over any other season. Cases in California, Florida, heavily spiking. Now, we've seen with the Premier League, you can play a sport behind closed doors. You can minimize that risk. Coronavirus positive tests of athletes in the Premier League is less than 1%. I think it's like even 0.1%. It's a very, very small fraction of players. In the latest round, which is round 13 of tests, they had one player test positive.
On that point, though, do you think that's because we are sort of plateaued and maybe slightly on the downward curve now for Corona? Or
no, I don't think
because
that
America is still going up.
No, I think it's purely down to the precautions that are being taken by the teams, by football clubs, and everything that players are. They get driven to and from home. They're like extremely wonderful facilities that are kept extremely clean with only essential personnel. They come into contact with very few people. Effectively, just think of a football team as a large bubble, and that's really what it is. And appreciate that the NFL is on a much bigger scale. There's far more players, there's far more people. I think you either streamline the people necessary in the facility, or I don't know what the true answer is. I don't think this 35% pay into escrow is something that is going to entice people to play. And for me, I've always been very optimistic that the season was going to happen regardless. I think my optimistic fans are going to get and watch many games, probably not. But I was always optimistic that something would happen. And this is the first kind of thing that's come across that's made me doubt that if they don't get this right, this could be a very, very difficult situation because, this 35% is it's a huge amount of pay.
Yeah.
You're talking about 40 million per team that's going to be held that should be the players.
So Patrick
So,
Mahomes.
well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of players that effectively are going to get, a lot of money put aside, and probably never see that. And I think that's something they need to overcome. And need to overcome pretty quickly. So, I just wanted to bring that up because there's something that's come out in the last few days since we last spoke, and it's something to keep an eye on and be wary. But we'll keep you up to date as much as possible. As for you mentioned, as of the deadline now, it's 9 p.m. here tomorrow night, 4 p.m. Eastern time. There are still 14 players that have yet to sign new deals. Dak Prescott, Derrick Henry, and Shaq Barrett are the highlight three. So if they do not agree a deal within the next 26 hours and 20 minutes, then they won't be able to negotiate a deal. They would just be
just tagged.
Yeah, they would just be playing on the tag for this season. There are 3 players who have not signed their franchise tenders. 2 are not a surprise to anybody. One is Yannick Ngakoue, the other is Chris Jones. They are very likely to sit out. The third one does surprise me, and that's AJ Green. Whether it's they're trying to work out a deal and just haven't done it yet, I don't know. But they're the 3 to watch, even though we're pretty confident 2 won't sign. It's highly unlikely Derrick Henry signs a deal. He has signed his tag, or he's going to sign his tag. But he will play on the tag this year and looks ever likely to hit free agency next season, as talks for the contract have come to a halt. There's a couple of players who have also cited a grievance. Shaq Barrett, for example, has cited a grievance because of his franchise tag. He was franchise tagged as an outside linebacker instead of a DE. That means he's getting a just over $2 million pay cut, effectively, based on position. Very awkward situation for everybody because for Shaq Barrett, he plays outside linebacker because the Bucs play a 3-4. So he doesn't line up in the front because of the way that the Buccaneers play the system. So the Buccaneers are well within their rights to tag him as a offensive, as an outside linebacker over a DE because that's his designated position. But for Shaq Barrett, who was the sack leader last year, he wants to earn his money. Typically in these situations, was listening to a couple of folks, Michael Lombardi in particular, and basically what they're saying is these guys go to a grievance, and then what happens is they end up settling, and they split the difference. So expect the grievance to be resolved extremely quickly with Shaq Barrett to get an extra $1 million. Sorry, hold on. Can we pause? I've got an urgent phone call. Hello?
This has got to be pretty urgent for Murph to pick the phone up. So I presume everything's all right. And I definitely know that there's a Ravens linebacker who's got the same issue as Shaq Barrett, but I can't remember his name. And without bouncing off a Murph, this is absolute comedy gold. Well, Rush Nation, I hope you're all having a nice day. I presume I'm still on the interwebs, wherever that is. But yeah, it'll be a sad situation if football isn't played. But I'm hopeful it is. I think the players will come to some sort of agreement and we can get rolling. But
sorry about that.
No worries, mate.
The boy had an accident. The wife was underprepared.
Oh no.
Anyway, sorted. So as I was saying with the grievance, I think Shaq will get his money. We'll get $1 million of it. They'll split the difference, and that'll be what happens.
And there's a Ravens guy as well in the same situation, isn't there? He's one of their linebackers, plays as a defensive end, but isn't classified as one, I think.
Yeah, it's all down to defensive schemes. It's kind of a stupid. Matthew Judon is the player.
That's the one.
And it's it's a bit of a rubbish situation because this thing happens every year. You would have thought the CBA would fix it, and it hasn't. They'll settle because ongoing grievances become very difficult, and they end up impacting the cap down the road. So it's better to get them settled early. The players who haven't signed a new deal, Shaq Barrett, I was pretty confident they get a deal done. I don't think they're going to get it done unless something drastically happens in the next 24 hours. Bud Dupree, we mentioned AJ Green already. Anthony Harris, Derek Henry, we've already talked about. Hunter Henry, which will be an interesting one because is it injuries is why they're not so sure, but they've tagged him. I don't really know. Chris Jones, we've already talked about is not going to play. Matthew Judon again with that grievance, probably unlikely he signs a deal. Yannick Ngakwe's not going to play unless he goes. But Dak Prescott's definitely the most famous of all the cases, and now the deal's been done with Patrick Mahomes. It'd be interesting to see what they do with Dak now. Do they get a deal agreed in the next 24 and a bit hours? And then Brandon Shreve, Justin Simmons. These are all players who don't have a new deal. Joe Tooney, Leonard Williams. So quite a lot of players there. Some could sign deals in the next 24 hours, and we'll try and keep you up to date. But definitely keep an eye on that. Everybody else will be playing on the tag and hit free agency or be tagged again next year.
Yeah, I know Simmons is in talks with the Broncos because I listened to Locked On with our boy Cody over there. But they're not. He isn't sure they get a deal done, so it wouldn't surprise me if they end up playing him on the tag.
It's very difficult to do a deal now because nobody's getting paid. Nobody's getting paid. Very few players are getting paid unless they're elite, like Patrick Mahomes, because people don't know what the future repercussions are of the salary cap. I mean, Shaq Barrett said it himself. He said it's very difficult to do a deal with me right now. He has a worth. He knows what he's worth. And until the team knows what's going on with the salary cap in the next couple of years, what those financial hits are going to be, because don't forget, as I think we've talked about on here before, salary cap is tied in to turnover of the league.
Yeah.
Turnover will go down because fans aren't going. Merchandise will be sold like in less quantity. You've got what's going on with the Redskins where no merchandise is being sold. So all that turnover is not happening. And then it's going to have an impact. And that impact could be anywhere from 30 to 80 million. Now, whether they stagger that over future years, who knows? I think because there's so much uncertainty, teams are just unsure about how much cap they can allocate for future years. Now, obviously, the Chiefs have decided to take that bullet with Patrick Mahomes because they think he's a once-in-a-generation player. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I think a lot of these players probably would have had deals done had the coronavirus not happened, and I think as a result, they probably won't get deals. And maybe they tag them and try and do a deal next year. Who knows? But it'd be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, 100%. I just, like you said earlier, this is one of the first things that is pointing towards the season not happening, and it just all feels like it's like a matchstick house. Everything's really wobbly, and it would be nice for a bit of solidification somewhere along the line. Whether, if the season doesn't happen because of health reasons, then great, but it would be bad for the season not to happen for monetary or anything like that rather than health reasons, because it would be just the wrong way to go about it, I think, morally. If it was for health and safety and the risk was too bad for COVID, then yeah, sure. But if there can't be a deal struck with the players or the owners or something like that, that would be a shame.
Well, I think the other thing you've got to think about is the players themselves. Perhaps they decide they're going to be a little less greedy. And I'm not saying they're being greedy. I think they deserve to get paid as much as they can get paid. But maybe they take a deal that is slightly less to get more in the future. Maybe they take what they can get now. I think it depends on the player and the position.
Yeah.
I think if you're a running back, that doesn't happen. But to err on the side of caution, especially with those players who aren't going to sign their tags tomorrow, and we're looking at Ngakoue and Jones being the two, Green, who knows what happens. Those two players not signing their tag, we saw what happened to Le'Veon Bell. You sit out a year and you end up taking a deal that isn't what you were offered before the tag,
because your value's diminished.
and then your value's diminished, and he's ended up on the Jets, which with Adam Gase, which has not worked out well for him. Let's be honest, and I think that's something to really consider. Is do players like Chris Jones and Yannick Ngakoue believe that this is the best route forward, or do they stomach it, sign the tag, earn their money? And again, the flip side is, what if they get injured? It's a tough question. You have to really live with the decision, but I think these players need to have something sorted. And I think I would always take the money versus not taking the money. I think even if it's a 1-year solution, I'd take the injury risk versus the non-injury risk.
Mm-hmm.
I think Yannick Ngakoue has a lot of issues with the team. And it's going to be interesting what happens. I'm not saying he owes him anything, but I think to himself, I don't know why you wouldn't take the money that you're going to get. These guys are earning excellent money on the tag. That's the one advantage of being on a franchise tag, is you're paid as a top sort of 10-ish player in that position, top 5 in some cases. I mean, to give you an idea, Derrick Henry on the tag is going to earn around about 10.2 million this year. As a running back, he's going to be one of the best paid running backs in the league. Chris Jones is going to earn 16.1 million. Yannick Ngakoue 17.8 million. I mean, we're not talking about insignificant amounts of money that these players will be paid for one season. That could be curtailed. And again, if it's curtailed, they probably get some money as a result. I don't know how it all works.
Yeah, no. It's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next 24 and a bit hours. That's definitely for sure. Right, Murph, let's do some tiers, quarterback tiers today. These are based on 4 point per passing touchdown. That's right. I'm correct. I've not gone mad here.
Yep, you're right. 4 points per receiving touchdown. Passing touchdown.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Obviously this does change for 6 points, and if you want to see them, then you're gonna need the book. So that's a little teaser there. If you can get yourself
breaking news.
Oh, I don't even have the drop.
Chris Jones has just signed a new deal, 4-year deal worth up to 85 million, in which 60 is in total guarantees upon signing.
Okay, decent.
So Chris Jones has signed a new 4-year contract. So there's me saying he's not going to sign the deal, and or he signed his tag and he didn't have to because they've worked out a deal. So the Chiefs are spending it. They are literally just getting the cash out and they're rolling it out. First they paid Mahomes, now they pay Chris Jones. 60 million guaranteed upon signing over the next 4 years.
Thanks for coming. That is a lot of money. But he is one of the best in the position, so...
Yeah. So he's basically given up, let's say, $1 million this year, but which will probably be incentivized to get guaranteed 15 million over the next 4, plus incentives and additional bonuses. So he's done very well with that deal. And it seems like quite a friendly deal as well.
Nice. I would like to apologise, Rush Nation, for the change of camera there. I was getting so laggy on my own screen. I presume I was for everyone else, and nobody needs to see that. So I'm now in standard definition. Apologies.
Didn't realise you had a high def mode.
No, I've got a separate webcam, but my Mac is now 11 years old and struggles to run it all. So
the problem that's happened is since you've done that on the live stream, I'm now under you and you're under me.
No. Oh well, you know who we are.
We love running live streams and testing Lee as much as possible.
Sorry, mate. I know you're still there listening, trying to fix it. Really sorry, but yeah, at least we're both still on the screen, right?
Yeah, he's fixed it. There you go. Good
Thanks,
job,
mate.
Love you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Where would we be without Lee in a black screen somewhere, completely immobile? Tell you what, Lee. Here you go. Look, there you go. That one's for you, buddy. Nice. Okay, let's talk some tiers. So we're going to run through our consensus tiers, because the one thing I've noticed about my fantasy points projected is that I'm a lot more bullish on quarterbacks than Murph is. And And if you've seen the book, then you've probably noticed that, because we've had quite a few people, message me definitely on Sleeper saying, Stocks, your rankings are all over the place, or don't agree with that. I'm like, well, this is how I've got to. So welcome to my head. That's all I can say. But we're going to go for the consensus rankings. And then if there's a player that we find is specifically a long way away from either of ours, we'll talk about them for a little bit. How does that sound, big man?
Good with me.
So obviously, Murph and I, we've got two distinct tiers, 1 and 2, and they're both different players. So our consensus top tier is Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes, and they are both in the top tier. And the way we worked out these points was, if there was a tiebreaker, for instance, Lamar and Patrick Mahomes, we averaged out our fantasy points, and then that gave us our top tier, top number 1 and number 2, and that's how we went about it, right?
Yeah, that's how we went about it. I think
it's very difficult to do a tiebreaker when there's two of you, because obviously if you have a draw, there's no neither or neither. It's difficult. So we went with it, and I presume my bullishness on fantasy quarterbacks has meant all the players I like more have gone higher up in the tiers of rankings.
I was going to say that is pretty much what has happened.
You're welcome.
To give some context, and we'll publish these on the website. Stocks is QB 21, which is Joe Burrow, is outscoring my QB 7, which is Deshaun Watson.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but not by a lot.
No, sorry, your QB 22 is Drew Brees, and he is scoring 2 points more, or 1.5 points more than Deshaun Watson of mine in 7th.
Yeah, but that's because all of mine are grouped heavily together, whereas yours is a little spread out now.
Yeah, no, I think the point I mean by that is that you have scored quarterbacks quite highly, and I've gone far more conservative. So probably the right answer is probably somewhere in the middle.
Well, if you want to be safe, follow Murph. That's how
I don't even think that. Like, to give you some context, 5 players broke 300 points last year. Admittedly, those 5, and those 5 were well over. I mean, Deshaun Watson in 5th scored 331 points. Josh Allen in 6th scored 297.
Okay.
So, I have stuck with trends of history, and that. And I'm not saying you're wrong, because there is more scoring going on in the NFL. I could be overly cautious based on looking at previous
optimistic.
And and you are expecting teams galore. And to be honest, with the lack of preseason, with the lack of prep, with the lack of potential scheming and time together, there could be more points scored. There's nothing. The thing with projections is people take them far too seriously. We do them based on how we've got to those numbers, based on what we think is going to happen. Your numbers could be far closer to reality based on those factors. Mine are basically based on more standard traditional settings, which aren't the case this year. So this isn't me like publicly mocking you. It's trying to explain
no
the difference between the approaches. Is I've gone for a very traditional approach, and I think you've gone for something based on what is happening now, where it's far more unpredictable.
And I'd like to think that I applied the same process to all of my players. So if they are all higher than yours, just because my points are higher, my rankings wouldn't change whether I reduce the whole lot by 10% or regardless. So even if my points are higher, we still have players relatively in the same position. So the rankings are the same. I've just gone a little higher on the projections, I think. And my process was the same throughout. So my rankings won't change, but maybe when I look at this again, I think I've overscored everyone here and they drop down. My rankings should pretty much stay the same, just the points might drop.
We do have some outliers, and there are definitely some players that we can pick out of this. But our top 3 are the same, maybe in a slightly different order. Whereas I've got Patrick Mahomes to return to number 1 by about a 30-point margin. You've got Lamar Jackson beating Mahomes by about a 32-point margin. So actually, we've got them in that same tier, scoring relatively the same amount of points. And I think they're the very clear 1-2,
Mhm.
whichever order you want to go by. I've marked in Lamar for some big regression this year. You have maintained him pretty similar. It's slightly less than what he was last year, but not too far. I baked in about a 60, 70 point regression, which is kind of where there is a huge difference. And people might think why I've marked him for a regression. It's because QB1s very rarely repeat. I think defenses are going to be more ready for Lamar. I think he's going to be forced to put the ball in the air more. And then I think that's where there'll be some drop off. I don't think he reaches that 1,000-yard running, whereas I think you have far more confidence in him this
Mm.
year. And we'll know at the end of the season who was right. But again, you can kind of see the logic here. Whereas we've got Mahomes scored relatively closely. I have him actually over your rank by about 7 points, but we have them pretty similar. Same way that we have Dak Prescott, we both have him at third, and he's in a tier in his own.
Yeah,
So
he's clearly on his own in our
yeah,
consensus as well.
so those tiers, the first three players we might have in a slightly different order for different reasons at 1-2, but effectively they are the elite, and I think that's recognised and reflected in the ADP. And the same goes with Dak at third. And then we both kind of see there is a drop down of a good 20 points or so to the next tier, where this is where we do differ a little bit. We both have Kyler in there. You have him at 4. I have him at 6. But in this tier, you have a very large tier 4, whereas I have a very small tier 4. And this is where you've grouped a lot of players. Like you have Josh Allen at 8. I have him at 4. But the
Did you?
difference between 4 and 6 for me is it's not even 4 points. It's 3.84 points
Yeah,
between Josh Allen at 4, Russell Wilson at 5, Kyler Murray at 6. Whereas your 4 to 12, the difference in there is only
13 points.
not even 12.9 points.
Yeah, so I'm pretty much happy with anyone after Dak Prescott until you get to Deshaun Watson on my rankings, which
But you do have some interesting players in your top 12. There's a couple here that are real outliers that we should talk about. The
here we
two
go.
that stand to mind are Gardner Minshew and Matthew Stafford and Ryan Tannehill.
Yep. Yep. I think although Ryan Tannehill is going to regress this year, there's no doubt about that. The efficiency was just supersonic last year. I think what they put together, they've got arguably the deepest roster in the NFL. And I don't think it was a fluke last year. I think it was overpriced for what they did. I mean, they excelled, should I say. But I think he's going to be good. And I think, there's a chance that the Titans staff have got it right, and people might think that last year was almost a complete fluke out of nowhere. But the fact that Tannehill was good in Miami, Lee's always told me how he liked Tannehill and was just Adam Gase, and we saw it last year. Put him in a decent offense, let him go, and he was pretty good. And then Gardner Minshew, yeah, I mean, this is even an outlier for me. I think what I've done with my rankings is I have ranked everybody at their ceiling, which is how I like to view people anyway. I'm very optimistic. So I think that it's me projecting him to be the best Gardner Minshew, and I got hold of Minshew mania, I suppose, and
Yeah.
yeah, he slotted in at 10 for me. And then obviously Matt Stafford was on a tear last year and unfortunately got injured, and I think he's going to be really, really good value. So I think although he is at 11 for me, I think possibly, the Lions can't run the football, even though DeAndre Swift's there. When Kerryon went down last year, Bo Scarborough and Ty, whatever his name, Chops was,
Ty Johnson.
Ty Johnson, that was it. They couldn't get it done. So Kerryon, he's talented. We've all seen the talent, but he does get injured. And although he's my boy, they did draft DeAndre Swift, and he projects as a 3-down back, and that's great. But they just don't have high rushing running backs yardage wise, and I think Matt Stafford is going to benefit from that, and he's going to be up there. And yeah, my third tier or fourth tier, I should say, is pretty good.
Yeah,
it's consistent, and yeah, I
so
don't mind anyone in it. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say.
no, I have some conflicting points on some of those. Tannehill, I do like. I understand that point. If he finishes as a QB7, would I be overly shocked? Probably not. I have him down at 13. but it's only about 28 points behind Deshaun Watson, who I have in 7. So it's not it's not, you're talking about a couple of touchdowns and a couple of large yardage games, and maybe with a rushing touchdown or 2 in there, kind of really swings it. So the big thing with quarterback, as we always say, especially in a 1 QB league, as long as you're getting a top 12, top 14 guy, it doesn't overly matter that much. You're not going to lose a lot of weeks playing a guy like Ryan Tannehill. I completely disagree with Minshew. I really don't like Minshew as a fantasy prospect. I love him as an actual quarterback. And he is a perfect example of a player who you can really get behind and support whilst him also being really bad at fantasy football. I have him down at 22. He's in a tier with me with Burrow and Jimmy Garoppolo and Ben Roethlisberger. So I don't hate him like that much. Like, I still think he's a viable option. I find it very hard to see him getting into the top 12. And Matt Stafford, the only reason I'm lower on him than most people, I have him down at 17. The reason I have him down that low is I've baked in for him to miss games. I just do not think he will play 16 games. And so my
fair.
projection is reflecting on him playing 13 games. And that's why he is further down my board. But I think if he did play 16 games, I think he could finish as the QB 11. So I don't necessarily disagree with your rank. I just have it differently because I've baked in how many games I think he will play.
Yeah.
And again, that's part of the risk of doing projections is I'm baking in something that might not happen. The same way you are. One of us will be closer to being correct at the end of the season. If he plays 16 games, it's more likely to be you. If he plays less, it's going to be me. And that's how projections are very much a personal thing. And that's why we do a consensus, because what this will do is end up righting some of the wrongs. So the consensus puts Matt Stafford at 14. He's going ADP sort of anywhere between 12 and 15, depending on which ADP data you look at. So our consensus brings him to the mean. And the more projections you put into a consensus, the more chance the data is going to be right.
Yeah.
One person is very rarely like that accurately correct, even though you do get winners of fantasy projection competitions like Fantasy Pros. But you have to find analysts you trust their process, whether that's stocks, whether that's me. But our consensus tends to be most of the time not too shabby because we kind of overcorrect each other, or we basically iron out. Like, for example, with where our difference with Minshew, we've got him at 16. And then all of a sudden is it unrealistic for Gardner Minshew to finish as the QB 16? Absolutely not.
Nope.
So, and he's baked into a tier with Baker Mayfield, Jimmy Garoppolo, Ben Roethlisberger, Joe Burrow. And you think he could finish above those guys. It's a reasonable outcome to where he finishes in a group with those guys and finishes on top of them. So that's interesting. So we talked about your top 12: Kyler Murray, Carson Wentz, 4 and 5, Jared Goff at 6, Ryan Tannehill 7, Josh Allen 8, Russell Wilson 9, Gardner Minshew 10, Matt Stafford 11, and you have Deshaun Watson at 12.
Mm-hmm.
So you have him quite a bit down, and also I have him down over consensus. I have him at 7. So that is interesting that we both are below the general consensus, which places him at 5th, 5th or 6th, depending on what rankings you look at.
Yeah.
But
I think there's a couple of players in here I'm going to have to, because it's weird once you're in the projection model, cranking away, doing it whenever you're doing it, and you think, yeah, that looks good, and then you smash it in, and it's not until you go back and look over the list just as a list with fresh eyes, you think, how is he there? Like, why is he there? Why is, like, I can't even see Drew Brees on my half of the list yet, and I'm thinking, this is Drew Brees. Like, the Saints' offense is ridiculous. Like, why can't I see him? So I think I'm going to have to go back and look at why Drew Brees isn't currently in my top 20, which is flat out ridiculous if you ask me. But there'll be a reason, and I just don't know why.
You need to look at it. And that's the thing. It's trial and error. It's putting it together. Whereas I have Brees at 8, so my rankings go Josh Allen at 4, 2.6 points ahead of Russell Wilson in 5th, who is another sort of 1.2 points ahead of Kyler Murray in 6th. Deshaun Watson is a bit of a gap, so he's in his own tier. Deshaun Watson, he's a near 16-point drop from Kyler Murray, and yet he's 16 points ahead of Drew Brees, who I have in 8th. Now, what's interesting in my tier here, I have a tier between 8 and 13 that is ridiculously close. These 6 players are separated by 2.3 points. And by the way, it looks like on the sheet there's a tie. I have an extra decimal point in my projections, so they are ranked in order. We're talking, fractions of a point. It's like
18ths of a yard.
yeah. So I have what looks like on the sheet is Drew Brees and Tom Brady 8 and 9 is the statistical dead heat. I have them at 0.0. I think that's like 0.04 of a point difference. So effectively a statistical dead heat, and then just 2 points, 0.2 of a point behind them. I have Daniel Jones at 10 and Matt Ryan at 11. So those 4 players are split by 0.2. I think it's 0.23 of a point. So that's 1 yard. No, 20. Yeah, 25 yards is the point. So 0.04.
Not a lot.
Yeah, so 4, 12, 16, 25. But 6 yards.
Oh,
6 yards
5.
passing.
Why couldn't you have made it 5, Murph?
I know. 6 yards passing between those 4 players. So very, very close. I have Jared Goff 0.7 of a point behind Daniel Jones and Matt Ryan. And the Matt Jones take, the Daniel Jones take might surprise people. We talked about this in the book and the consistency side. And then we talked about it on the quarterback consistency show, which you can go back and find. We did it, I think, in February, where it talks about he had some high games. It was very inconsistent, as you would expect from a rookie, but he had 4 MVP games where he was, a top 3 to 6 scorer in that week. And I expect him to have more of those when there's more weapons, because he had one of those weeks when he had no weapons to throw to. He was throwing to Darius Slayton.
Yeah.
And I have Wentz. He's just outside the QB1 for me, but it's literally 1.4 points, and I like Wentz. And if someone said to me Wentz is going to finish as a top 7, top 8 QB, a couple of points in it. So any of these guys here, my first 13 QBs, I'm happy to have any of them in a 1 point, in a 1 QB league. Probably will never be taking any of the first 3 to 5, maybe even the first 6. But anyone below that, I genuinely don't have a problem owning any of those players, because they're all in the QB1 conversation. Even Wentz, even though he's just outside, I'll very happily settle for Carson Wentz. And that's the point where I start to think I need to have one of these guys.
Yeah, and the way we should mention the fact that tiers are useful in the way that you can see where the drop off at that position is. So Murphy, you were just talking about your 8th to 13th quarterback is being your tier 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, your 4th tier.
No, 6th tier.
6th tier, but you'd still happily have them as your quarterback 1. If there was quarterbacks going around them that were in tiers after, and there was only one of those guys left, and you think, well, there's a quarterback run coming, or there's just been one, and one of these guys is here, I know I'm getting a value, or I need to take this guy now because he won't make it back if there's going to be a run. So having tiers is useful in the fact that you can print these sheets off, or you can use it on your phone and cross them out, so you know exactly who's there when you're drafting. Because you think, oh, well, I know I did this a lot last year with Marvin Jones Jr. I can't remember what tier I had him in as my wide receiver, but he was just hanging about in drafts, and I thought, this is a value now because he's in a tier or 2 tiers above the guys that are going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really, really key to think about. The one thing I would say is with tight ends and with QBs, the teardrops just aren't massive. I have a tier of 14 to 18. I have Baker Mayfield at 18. I know Jack Duffin's watching, so don't kill me, Jack, because for him to become a QB1, he's got to get, in my rankings, 17.7 points, which is a couple of passing touchdowns or a couple of rushing touchdowns and a few extra yards. Like it's not a huge amount. But then my next tier down goes to Ben Roethlisberger. That drop in tier is 4 points. It's not huge. It's just a line where there is a gap that's significant enough. All my tier breaks are all within, with the exception of, I think the biggest tier break I have is Mahomes to Lamar, which is 30 points. And then all the other tier breaks are all within 20 points, I think, up until like the very end, where I have players playing bit part, like Taysom Hill over Jameis Winston at 39 and 40. Well, it doesn't matter because you're not drafting those players. It doesn't make any difference. But the teardrops are just so insignificant. They're 10 points, 14 points. Actually, Justin Herbert to Dwayne Haskins is significant. That's 20, 26 points. So that's where a tier matters, especially in RBs and wide receivers. The teardrops can be quite significant. You can see a 20 point, a 30 point drop. That's where it becomes significant. You know, if I was sitting there and I had the choice between Baker Mayfield, Ben Roethlisberger, another position, I would probably choose the other position and then expect one of those guys to come back to me. And if I got stuck with Ben Roethlisberger over Baker Mayfield, a 4 point difference in my rankings, I'm not going to care. Like it's
No.
not a significant. It isn't a different tier only because I have to create different tiers and there's a significant drop, but it's not that significant. It's 4 points. And in QBs, as we're talking about, I have a lot of QBs scoring very similar amount of points. You have a lot of QBs scoring a very similar amount of points. That's why QB accuracy is so difficult because they score so similar. If you look at last year, for example, you had a course of a season. You had Jameis Winston in third, and he scored 1.7 points more than Russell Wilson in fourth, who scored 1.62 points ahead of Deshaun Watson in fifth. And then there's a gap, and it is significant. It's 34 points ish. You got Josh Allen in sixth. He scored 0.28 of a point more than Kyler Murray in seventh. Like this is what I mean. Patrick Mahomes is 5 points behind them because he was injured.
They're
Carson Wentz
literally,
is 5 points behind him.
it's just
Carson
a
Wentz to
bag of
Aaron
crisps,
Rodgers.
isn't it? It's a
Yeah,
bag of crisps, and you're grabbing out different ones with different, very close point, like size of crisp, if you want, if that's a.
well, yeah. Carson Wentz to Aaron Rodgers 9 and 10 is split by 0.52 of a point, and then the drop back to Matt Ryan in 11th is 1 point. Like it's just they're. And if you go through, you could look at previous year's data. This is what happens. Players just score so evenly. Like there's just not a big difference between like Tom Brady to Jared Goff. The difference was 8 points last year. 8 points was the difference between Goff being an QB1 and a QB2. Like it just isn't enough to really think about investing a lot in that position because once you get past the first couple of guys, that's it. They're all going to score roughly the same amount of points until you get down to
Tyrod Taylor.
I'm looking at last season.
Oh, right, yeah.
So, like, for example, Baker Mayfield finished 19th last year, 250.18 points. He finished 21.5 points behind Tom Brady in 12th. And you split that over 16 games. You're looking at about 1.5 points a game. Like, it's just not going to make or break your season. The difference why you might pay up on someone like a Brady, someone like a Matt Ryan, is they're more consistent, whereas Baker Mayfield is a bit more up and down. And that's kind of what you're buying for the price, but you still don't need to invest, before the 9th round in any of these players. And again, we've talked about in the book, we talk about Lamar Jackson, we talk about Patrick Mahomes. Their MVP seasons came when they were going off as the 10th, 15th quarterback off the board and even undrafted in Lamar Jackson's case in leagues. There's no way to, I'm kind of bashing projections here right now. That there's no, fantasy analysts pretty much stink at predicting who's going to be the quarterback one, which is kind of what I've said in the book and written about. So this conversation could almost be deemed as pointless, but you need to have a strategy, and that's why what these projections are telling you is just pick a guy late. Just go and get a guy late because it's not a significant enough difference between the QB 17 and the QB 8. It's just not significant. My QB 16 to my QB 8 is, as I've mentioned, it's 18 points. It's nothing. Your QB 18 to your QB 12 or 8 is your 18th to 8th is also 18 points.
Yep. Like I said earlier, I think my points are just inflated. Whereas if you shrunk them down, I think if you equaled out the difference in position between our points basis, it would actually give a fairly similar drop in each tier between our tiers, points wise. It's just mine are obviously, like I said, sunny side up, inflation projections, and Murph's been a bit more cautious. But I think once you get to our consensus points and stuff like that, I think they start to get closer to the actual mark rather than stretched either way.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. But you should focus in on analysis if you like the way that Stocks is explaining his. You can weight his rankings over mine. You can ignore that the same way that you look at mine over Stocks's. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is give you advice and a bit of just thought. And what it has, having this data in front of you, is saying all it screams out to anybody is just don't invest high in a position, because okay, you've got, in your case it's slightly different because you have a 90-point gap between Lamar in first and Deshaun Watson in 12th,
Mhm.
and 90 points is significant, and that could make Lamar Jackson a league winner. Whereas in my case, I have a similar gap to 1 and 13, but when you start to factor what that opportunity cost is in another position, that could be the difference between getting an elite running back and not getting an elite running back. And then actually then has the knock-on effect in other positions of your draft. So on first glance, this would say I need to go up and pay for a QB. And actually, when you start to factor in the point differences, let's look at this on running backs. The running back differences that we have between first and say 24th is ridiculous. It's 230 points.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's fair if you use Christian McCaffrey.
Well, yeah, but we're using the same case for
Yeah, okay, fair.
Patrick Mahomes. But okay, let's go different then. Let's look at Lamar Jackson, right? So, or let's do Dak Prescott in third, right? So let's say Dak Prescott is a fifth round ish player, and a fifth round player you can get in fantasy drafts right now. So I'm going to skim through our rankings and find one. Let's go with Jonathan Taylor, right? I think that's a pretty good example of a fifth round player that you can get. We project him to get around about 200 ish points, and if you pass up on him and go and get a running back slightly later than that, let's say you've got to go, say, a couple of rounds later to go and get the next one, that gap all of a sudden becomes 50, 55 points. Whereas if you're doing that with quarterback, all of a sudden that gap just isn't all that big.
No.
You're getting, a player for, a 30-point difference or 40-point difference. And then more importantly, you've got a better roster construction. So I think the merit of this is look at how many guys there are. And again, when drafting a QB, especially in a one QB league, the QB is just not going to win you that many weeks unless they have elite production. And most of the time, they're statistically so close.
Mm.
So if you want to go up and spend up on a Mahomes and a Lamar, then I understand that. And, you should do that if that's what you think is right. The downside is that strategy has never worked. It just has never worked. And there is years of data that in the book that explain that everyone who took Patrick Mahomes as the QB1 last year struggled. And you can say, well, he was injured. But it happens every year. Every year, the QB1 heavily regresses. If we go back over time, he was, I mean, Patrick Mahomes wasn't bad last year. He was the QB8 because he was injured. If we go back to 2017, in 2017, Russell Wilson was the QB1 with 348 points. The following season, again, he didn't do badly, but he went to 9th. So he went from 1st to 9th one season. Didn't really do it.
What was the points differential between that season and the last?
About 50 points.
That's a significant as well.
Significant regression. We go back to 2016, Aaron Rodgers, 380 points. You go the following season, Aaron Rodgers I think he got injured this season. Yeah. So
that shows you, doesn't it? Like, yeah. You've drafted him at a high cost because he's Aaron Rodgers, and he goes and get injured in a single position where there's no scarcity of getting a streaming backup or something, and you've got Aaron Rodgers as opposed to a third-round running back or a third-round wide receiver, in which you've lost out positionally there, where you could have got a quarterback later on for less cost, and it really improved your roster construction.
Yeah, I mean, even Cam's MVP season, 389 points. Massive season. The year later, he dropped 140 points. All right, he missed one game in that time.
Yeah,
So,
that's still a
but still,
significant
he
drop.
finished as the QB7, and that's because people watch tape, people prepare, people just get better. Roster churn happens, all of these sorts of things. But ultimately, the reason that, as I stated in my case for Lamar Jackson's regression, is one, it always happens. Every player who finishes the QB1 regresses, but that's not enough of a reason. So you have to sit there and think about it. And I think I have capped his rushing production by about 20%. And they've picked up more running backs this year. They're more confident they're going to run in, especially closer to the goal line. I think Lamar's going to have to put the ball in the air more, and I think that's why I baked him in. Listen, I've still got him as the quarterback too, but taking Lamar Jackson as the QB2 in the second or third round in the one QB league is now no longer attractive. It just doesn't make any sense. So I guess that's the thing: is form is there to be broken, and 1 year taking one of these QBs high will eventually pay off. But until that happens, I will always shirk it, because as I outline in the book, the opportunity cost of what you're giving up, as you mentioned, especially in positions of scarcity like running back and wide receiver, is just too much. There's no point in having the best QB in the game and then end up playing as your 1-2 punch of running backs, like a James White and a Kareem Hunt. It's just not going to do it for you.
I'm pretty sure I've definitely done that in a league this year. So I'm pleased to hear that that's definitely not going to work for me, Murph. Thank you very much.
Well, I just want to save you some time on the season. So,
all right.
I'm just trying to think some other conflicting ranks between you and me. Cam, you've got Cam playing all 16 games, I think, and ending up as your QB 13.
I've definitely not baked any injury games in. All my projections are based for 16 games, because I felt that was the easiest way for me to start out doing it. And it's not going to be. My rankings will start to reflect that as I get closer to the season on injuries and stuff. But for my initial projections, because this is the first time I've done it and it was difficult to wrap my head around it, the easiest way to do it was just to work out what 16 games was and go from there, which is probably why my points are all a lot higher as well, because you've baked in injury possibilities, whereas I've gone for they're all going to play 16 games and no one's going to get injured or COVID.
Yeah. It's just all different ways of doing it. Again, this is where you've got to find the right formula, the right thing for you, which is why we like consensus rankings. And to be honest, part of what we'll do, so what we're going to do, we're going to publish these on the site and we'll update every week. If you are a Patreon of ours, or Patreon, whichever way you want to pronounce it, you can join this. We're going to add the sheet to, or at least the full doc with all the stats on here that you have access to. I'm also going to include like a base sheet that you can use for rankings, or at least access to a link to where you can get that. Have a go at doing rankings yourselves, and as Docs and I will, if you're on our Patreon, you can join. We've got tiers from $3 a month all the way up to $25 a month. But if you get in on any of the tiers, you can get custom projections for your league that we will do. But also, if you want to take a look at projections and get an idea, probably Stocks and I can do some sort of masterclass on, how we get to our numbers and how to project and how to at least do rankings, and have a go at doing them yourselves, and it will make you a better fantasy player.
Even if it's just a basic way of doing it, it will allow you to produce your own tiers, because you can't produce tiers without a final number. It's all very well getting the 32 starting quarterbacks, putting them into 32s, but how do you develop the tiers from that? You need to go a step further and have a number that you can base that tier off, which is where projections are king, because they give you a final, whether you want to do it, even if you just do it on yards, or, Murph and I spit out a fantasy points at the end of it, and then we do our tiers from that. You need something to rank that, to build that tier off. You can't just do it off of a list. So that's why projections is good, because not only does it allow you to look at deeper into rosters and who you think's going to do well and who you think's not, but it then allows you to build your own tiers. So rather than following an analyst like Murph or myself or the Ballers or Fantasy Pros or even using ECR, you've got your own rankings. And fantasy football's supposed to be fun and you're supposed to trust your own gut. So why not build your own rankings? Because it doesn't get any purer in my eyes than building your own rankings and using your rankings to dominate fantasy football.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong once you've done your rankings at looking at other people's rankings and
Nope.
see where you're potentially going wrong, or why people have ranked them differently. I know many people who do rankings who are quite happy to take questions on their rankings. We're quite happy to take questions on our rankings and why we have certain players ranked in a very certain way. And that's how you learn. We had Dwayne McFarland on this time last year. We were in the Scottish Bowl together, and he, kindly came on the show, and he wrote a great article on projections and how to do them. And this isn't something you get right in a year. This is something that is a cumulative effort that you spend over years. But just the better you are at doing this, just the more you'll understand of the game, you'll understand what things really matter. And you can get your rankings completely wrong, and it doesn't matter, because the whole point isn't to get them right, because you're never going to get them right. We're dealing with human beings, we're not dealing with robots. But what you're doing is you're starting to understand what you value, and more importantly, what the game of fantasy football values for points. And when you start to understand that process, you become a better player, because all of a sudden you can just start seeing value on fantasy football boards. And it's no longer just, I think this player is better, but no justification for it.
Yep.
I can go to any player on my board and I can sit here and tell you why I have that player ranked there. And I have a justification and I have a reason for it. I have all the data behind it. I could be 100% wrong, but I'm wrong by what I have done, and then I learn from it. So the following season, I look at my rankings and think, wow, I had this player dead wrong last year. And let's look at why I got it wrong. Okay, so his passing percentage was well off. I had him at 62 and he completed 69%. So he's a better passer than I think he is. Therefore, I have to bake that into next year's projections. And eventually, after a few years, you get pretty good at it and you get better and better. And, you're never going to get 100% right. There's injuries, there's humans, there's COVID, there's all these sort of different factors, coaching changes, all those sorts of things start to go into all of this makeup. But ultimately, at the end of the season, you're going to come out and you're going to learn a lot more. And you'll be a better, like I said, a better fantasy player, because you know what you're valuing, you know what types of players you're looking for. And it just means you're dominating you with more leagues. So if you desperately want to do your own rankings, you can join our Patreon, or you can hit us up on Twitter, and we'll send you a link where you can get some basic ranking data, like in terms of how to do a sheet, and then you can go through and work it out. If you're on our Patreon, we'll give you some time and work out how to do it. Maybe we'll even record a video and how you do your rankings, and some of the things you need to consider, for people that are willing to sponsor and help the website.
Yeah, basically the only way you can view our entire projection sheet model is by joining the Patreon. If you got the book, you got the rankings, but you don't get any fantasy points in that. And if you join the Patreon, we can allow you access to the sheet and we can even show you our entire projection models, where we get yards per attempt, yards per catch, percentage, completion percentage, all of that stuff. So yeah, there's a bit of a benefit to being a patron, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get access to us pretty frequently, and you get access to what we do in our processes and everything that goes along with it. So and I've got a lot of cool tools that I'm going to start sharing on there that either I've built or have amended from what somebody else does, and then amended them into how I do things, and then taking it that way. But there's credit wherever on any sheet I use. So join the Patreon. It's starting at $3 a month, but there's all the different tiers on there. What you get, different benefits. The $10 and larger tiers, you get items of clothing with it. So it's really valuable, and just hope this you'll be able to see the rankings on the site. I don't know when we're planning to get these up, mate. Probably probably end of the week.
Yeah, maybe.
It'll be end of week on Monday. We'll drop them on the Patreon first, and then they'll go live on the site. It'll be within a week. They'll be up on there for you to view, and you can look at the fantasy points. And again, we'll take any questions. Anyone that has any questions on why we've ranked a player a certain way, happily answer that.
Yep, 100%. Oh, and don't forget, we've still got running back, wide receiver, and tight end to do. And who knows, we're getting closer to the season. We might even do like a wide receiver 1, 2, and 3 breakdown of rankings closer to the season as well, before we, because we're going to get quite deep into it when we hit running back and wide receiver, because there are a lot of players at each position, and our tiers will differ significantly going forward. But yeah, closer to the season, you might get a short pod. Well, not a short pod, because we only do our pods, Merv, because when you talk, we get going. But yeah, there might be a more in-depth look at wide receivers, running back ones, and so forth going closer to the season, should the season happen, and we sure hope it does. If you haven't got yourself a copy of the Fantasy Football Playbook, why not? Go get yourself one, win those leagues. We give you we arm you with the information to help you make decisions to win your leagues. We're not telling you how to do it. We're giving you the information to make those processes yourself. And it's over on the website, 5yardrush.co.uk. Find the Fantasy Football Playbook. And if you want a paperback, it is also available on Amazon. I think it may still be on sale at £14.25. I haven't verified that recently. If
No,
not,
it's $14.99.
Oh, it's gone back up, Rush Nation. It's now you've missed the boat on the 70 odd p savings. So yeah, it's $14.99 now. But yeah, if you want a copy paperback, the paper's great because you can write on it and use highlighters and markers and stuff, because we wanted you to be able to use it as a book, not just as something you pick up and read, but a tool in your armory, shall we say.
Yeah, absolutely. And anything anything you want to know about the book before you buy it, get in touch. You can buy it direct from us, PDF version. There are a couple of sites that have promo codes. I'm sure you can probably find one of the podcasts that has a code where you can find it and get it at the pre-sale price of $5.99. If not, it's $7.99. It's you're talking about the price of a cup of coffee, a croissant, and something else. So it's not a lot of money to spend, especially as people are going out less. Hopefully, you've got that money that you've saved from your coffee, for example. So, there is some breaking news that Shaq Barrett isn't going to sign the deal. He's going to sign his tender, and that will be signed by tomorrow.
Nice. Well, Rush Nation, if you not breaking news, it's been on there for a while, but orders have started coming in now for the FFCC 20 t-shirt. Got my first one from the printers today to send to the United States of America. Would you believe it? It's gonna fly. I'm not sure which way the courier goes, but it is beautiful. It's a matte print on a white or grey t-shirt, and they're in the shop now, which is also over at 5yardrush.co.uk. Go get your FFCC t-shirt and go represent the league.
And just on that point, we don't make a great deal of profit on the shirts. We make very, very little, but whatever little profit we make, we will, on the FFCC shirts, we will donate to charities. It is a charity league, so we will donate all the profits from the t-shirt, and believe me, it's not tons, because we want you to enjoy the merchandise. But it's really small. It's not even half a pint's worth. So we will donate every penny of profit that we have, and we'll probably add some money ourselves on top if you do buy the merchandise. So on this show notes, we'll put the link to the t-shirt. If you're in the FFCC, thanks for joining and supporting. There is still some ways to get in. We have one spot remaining to give away. Stocks didn't tell you this, but we have one spot to give away. There's a few other sites that have some spots to give away. Our title sponsor, King Fantasy Sports, has 3. The 5 Yard College guys, you heard the announcement last week, they have 3 spots to give away. Franchise Tag podcast has a spot to give away. A couple of other podcasts have Full 10 Yards have a couple of spots to give away, and you can hear me on that podcast later on this week. And there's a spot that's going to be given away on that, or how to win it from there. For us, and our final spot, this is a charity league. So ultimately, the whole point of this, other than to create a fun format that's very different from anything out there, it's a best ball single bracket or single elimination bracket tournament. 256 teams, one wins it all. It's that simple. You don't set a lineup, you draft, and then you let the gods decide who wins. The way to win our spot is really, really simple. The very first person to make a £25 or $25 donation to the charity of their choice gets the spot. That's it. $25, £25 donation to the charity of their choice that they want to support, big, small, whatever, and then sends it to us either via DM or via a tweet. Don't mind which. Prefer tweet with the hashtag FFCC. But if you want to keep those details private, I completely understand. Some people have very personal reasons as to why they support certain charities. £25, $25 donation. Or if you are in the UK and want to do the $25 amount and work out what the difference is, and that's fine. That's what it is. First person to do it gets the spot that we see.
It's good.
I can't hear you, mate. Your audio's gone.
This is that better?
Yeah, better.
Yeah, this could happen before the podcast goes live. I mean, this is live in the world now. So before I edit it and stuff, that could even happen. So yeah, get out there, Rush Nation, and support those charities and get in the.
It'll be time stamped. When I say the first one I see, it'll be the first one time stamped to us. So I'm not going to go off the one that finished on the top. So no tactical, or I'll wait till the middle of the night because it'll be the first things Murph sees in the morning. No. It's the first one time stamped on Twitter. £25, $25 donation to the charity of their choice gets the spot. That's how you win it. Very simple. If you don't win it from us, there's still, check out the 5 Yard College guys. They're dropping a pod on Wednesday, I believe, and they're going to talk about how you can win the spot from them. So, or spots, they've got multiple.
Yep. So if you haven't listened to the 5 Yard College guys, they are over on Twitter at 5 Yard College. They've got their own podcast channel. So if you want to hear them, you've got to search 5 Yard College in your podcast app. They've started really well, and we're really pleased with what they've brought out, and their product is terrific. So yeah, Tom and Ash, great job over there, buddy. Murph, this has been an absolute blast, mate. We'll chat later on in the week, no doubt about it. But Rush Nation, if you're going to listen to the college guys until tomorrow, keep rushing. But for the rest of you lot, until next week, as always, don't forget, keep rushing.